the Gold Coast, the Gold Coast #1 asbestos removal company. Today, I want to talk about units and high-rises and asbestos and where asbestos can be found, because they have a few places that a lot of people live in these units and high-rises and they're probably totally unaware. So let's run through a few quick places. So fire doors, back in the day, before 1990, a lot of fire doors just had asbestos sheeting inside them. So you, like a normal door, the front would be a veneer, 6mm of plywood or wood, and then they'd have 2 or 3 sheets of asbestos in the center. And that was the door. So when these doors, like everything, they get open and shut 1,000, 100,000, million times over the years, eventually they have to be replaced. That's a job for us, for Coastal Asbestos. Or a lot of fire companies have the license to remove the doors and then they can safely transport them. But I just want you to be aware. So things with fire doors in your building, if they're the older type, when they come off, if the handle's broken or the lock's broken or the hinge is broken up the top, that's it, they're out. Because what happens is when you pull those screws out or you try and change that lock, back in the day when they believed asbestos was safe, they've just bored through with hole saws and drills and all this kind of stuff. And when you take those handles and those locks off, you're going to release that powder that's been sort of trapped in there for 40 years, 30 years, 50 years, whatever it will be. So that's fire doors. Be very wary of fire doors in old buildings. Don't play around with them. Like anything asbestos, don't play around with it. Another thing that we find in high-rises a lot is what they call popcorn ceiling or vermiculite. And basically the way that got there is that when they build high-rises with concrete decks, you know, each high-rise floor is about this thick of concrete. When they pull the formwork off, it's a bit ugly. So the cheapest, easiest way to sort of cover the imperfections and get a sort of finish that's the same all the way through, consistent is a word I'm looking for, they used to spray this stuff on called popcorn ceiling. Now, like many other building products, they manage to get asbestos into it because of its heat resistance and fire resistance qualities. We speak to our occupational hygienists a lot, and one of the great tips that we got from Sue Ellen was that in some high-rises, they would use asbestos in the popcorn ceiling in the kitchens, but then to save money, they wouldn't put it in the bedrooms and the lounges and places like that. So you really need to do a couple of samples if you're testing for asbestos in popcorn ceilings. While we're still on ceilings, again, coming back to that concrete and sometimes plaster as well, a stippled finish. So any sort of textured finish you see on plaster or concrete, it was all done by hand. Like guys had these big brushes and they would do a swirl pattern or a stab pattern, all that kind of stuff. They put asbestos in that paint or in that plaster or whatever that medium was to give it body and thickness and fire resistant qualities and insulation qualities. Another place that you can find asbestos in high-rises is the rubbish chute. Some of those buildings have a big rubbish chute from the top to the bottom, and it'll be a big pipe, you know, something like about this size. That pipe is often asbestos, so be very careful around those rubbish chutes. Other places that you can find asbestos, this one you won't believe, is in the pool. And that's not just the high-rise pools, that's any pools. It's called marble sheen. It's like a really nice blue coating, and that contains asbestos. Still outside the building, so things around the pools like the pool huts, the covers for the pool filters and the pool equipment can have asbestos sheeting in them. What else we've got? In the meter boards. So back in the day, because of the qualities of asbestos, one of them being it didn't conduct electricity, a lot of backing boards for meter boards in a lot of buildings, houses included, had asbestos all through those meter boards. While we're talking about the mechanics of the building, also the lifts, a lot of lift wells had asbestos components in them, especially for the lift for the brakes. A lot of lifts go up and down by the electric motors and are stopped by the electric motors, but they have emergency brakes, and those brake pads, just like in cars, contain asbestos. Where else we got in high-rises? So we've gone through doors, so we're inside the building. Look, you can still have fibro and asbestos-lined bathrooms and wet areas. That's pretty common. If you're talking a really, really old building, a lot of them can have an asbestos compressed flooring on the decks if they've got outside balconies, but that's more units, not really high-rise situation, but it's still really common. We went to a job the other day and the handrail was metal and it had these big panels in there, decorative panels, and those panels were massive big sheets of asbestos. So that's your 19mm compressed. That's usually a flooring product, but it can be used decoratively in high-rises. On high-rises, especially up on the roof, there's a high-rise down at Coolangatta that's got an asbestos roof on it. Also too, in waterproofing, any sort of waterproofing around the building, mastic in joints can have asbestos. And sometimes a roof, if they've got a flat roof, they'll have a asbestos membrane roof, and that's basically like some sort of fabric, might have some felt or whatever in it, but that'll have that mastic. The mastic that sticks that down and joins those joins can have asbestos in it, and the matting can have asbestos. Apart from the other stuff, like in the basement, you can see pipes hanging up. Those pipes can most likely be asbestos, especially the stormwater and the sewage pipes. Back in the day in Queensland, there was a lot of strikes, a lot of power strikes. So a lot of those old buildings have generators, and some of the stuff on those generators, because they were obviously, a lot of them are diesel engines, so there's gaskets and fittings and sort of heat shielding, all that kind of stuff can be found in high-rises. So we're talking about high-rises built before 1990, and that's a hell of a lot on the Gold Coast. So we do a lot of work in high-rises. We seal a lot of this stuff, and fortunately a lot of it's in really good condition and managed. Most high-rises, well, they all should have one, but most of them have their asbestos register and control plan in place, so they're aware. The building manager is aware of what's in the building and what sort of conditions in. So I know that was a lot, but I just wanted to talk about asbestos in high-rise buildings, and everything that I said applies to office buildings as well. Another part that I suppose while we're still talking about it is there was a lot of spray on, like the vermiculite was also decorative, but it was also used for fireproofing as well. So it can be there, and like I said before, mastics. So when stuff goes through floor to floor or wall to wall, they use fireproof mastics that contain asbestos. So I think that's it. That's enough. That's a lot. So that's it for me, Jason from Coastal Asbestos, the Gold Coast #1 asbestos removal company.